Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome to this webinar, The Role of Ethical Frameworks in Clinical Trials for Vaccine Development. This webinar is the sixth in a series of planned webinars with the goal of providing information on available career options in the field of vaccinology. My name is Caroline Matev, the Vaccinology Workforce Development Program Strategy and Planning Manager at the KEMRI-Wellcome Trust Research Program. And together with my colleagues, Professor George Warimwe, Miriam Murithi, and Linnea Imbai, we welcome you to this forum. So before we start, we have a few housekeeping matters. Kindly note that this webinar is being recorded. Kindly feel free to use the chat option to share your questions during the presentation, and we will address them during the Q&A session. We will have a few open slots for people to directly ask questions to the presenter. And if your internet is unstable, just raise your hand using the available icon and we'll be able to unmute you to ask your question. As earlier mentioned, this is a series of planned webinars with the goal of providing information on available career options in the field of vaccinology. This is being run under the KEMRI-Wellcome Trust Research Program, which is a world-renowned health research unit of excellence that is based in Kilifi and Nairobi in Kenya, as well as Mbale in Uganda. Over the years, we have excelled in the use of novel ideas and collaborations to achieve better health for Africa, while also developing the Africa scientists, the scientific leaders. Our vision at the program is to undertake cutting-edge and novel research relevant to national, regional, and global needs. It is under this program that we have the Vaccinology Workforce Development Program that aims to expand the technical know-how and capability of sustainable end-to-end vaccine research and development in Africa through training and knowledge exchange activities in the vaccine ecospace. And this involves areas such as target product profiling, research and discovery, preclinical and clinical studies, biomanufacturing, regulatory affairs, and deployment. Now, we do this through three channels. One, through internships at human vaccine manufacturing institutes, and we hope to use this to establish a mentorship scheme that links interns with senior vaccinologists and market systems that where they're able to share and strengthen experiences in the vaccine research and development and manufacturing space. We also do a fully funded 2-week course in vaccinology that is presented both in English with a French translation to successful applicants who are then selected based on their direct involvement with vaccine research and their excellence in professional and academic achievement. The third manner in which we develop this capacity is through webinars, such as this one, to early career scientists, graduates, and undergraduate university students in Africa to help provide that information on potential career options that they could be able to take as they're going through their coursework. This program is in alignment with the Africa Union Partnership for Africa Vaccine Manufacture, that's PAVAM, and they have the ambition to increase the local vaccine production to meet at least 60% of Africa's routine immunization needs by the year 2040 and strengthen the capacity of vaccine research, discovery, and manufacture in Africa. So part of this is what we have for the webinar series in alignment with that particular goal. So today we are glad to have Professor Dorcas Kamuya, who will be discussing the role of ethical frameworks in clinical trials for vaccine development. Professor Kamuya is the head of Health Systems and Research Ethics Department at the KEMRI-Wellcome Trust Research Program here in Kenya, and she's also the Associate Professor at the Nuffield Department of Medicine, University of Oxford. Her research includes examining ethical and socio-cultural issues on complex topics that include biobanking, controlled human infection studies, pandemic preparedness, and response in low middle income countries. She's also examining the value of community and public engagement in health research and the ethical dilemmas for frontline research workers. Prof is one of the investigators in the establishment of Africa Population Cohort Consortium, which is co-leading an exchange network that examines decolonization in global health research and is co-leading the work that is examining vaccines for vulnerable populations, among other contributions that she has. She's also a member of several scientific committees and boards within Kenya, regionally and internationally. Please help me welcome Professor Dorcas Kamuya. Over to you, Prof. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Is anything being shared at the moment?
No, not yet.
Okay.
We can see your, we could see a screen, but not the presentation screen.
And now?
There we go. Yes, put it on full share mode, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Caroline, and it's such a great pleasure to be able to be part of this initiative, very exciting initiative on thinking about vaccines and career opportunities for many researchers. This is a topic, it's a broad topic that I will attempt to address, although I have to say there's a lot of material that may not be covered now. So quickly, this is an outline of what I intend to cover in the next 40 or so minutes. First is just our own reflection on what ethics means to us and why ethics is important in vaccine trials. And then look at some of the guidance documents and what they talk about, or even refer to with regard to ethical conduct of research, including vaccine trials. And then a bit of reflections on some of the contextual considerations that we need to bear in mind. And then also look at importance of teams that are undertaking vaccine trials and of community engagement, and then a few concluding remarks. In this, I'll have some interactive sessions where I'll pose some questions, and there's an app, Mentimeter app, that I'll encourage you to use that app to respond to some of the questions. This is a brief recap. Looking at previous sessions that you've had, I'm sure you've covered all the stages of vaccine development. Or if not, there's opportunity to do that. There's a lot that is written about the different stages of vaccine development, right from exploratory all the way to post-licensure surveillance. I'll not talk about any of those. Important to know is there are many steps in each of these stages, and that ethical issues are not just at the point of conducting research with participants, but across all these stages of vaccine development. My initial attempt at trying to figure out what the ethical issues are for each of those, I quickly realized that I need several sessions to go through that. And so I'm going to focus a lot more on the vaccine trials. That is the clinical development stage of vaccine development, phases 1, 2, and 3. And while I've talked about the phases 1, 2, and 3, in my presentation, I'm not differentiating between the phases. So this is a question. This is a really fast attempt on how well the Mentimeter will work. So the first question is, what words or phrases come to mind when you think of ethics? You could use your phone and use the QR code, or you can also go to your internet, type in ment.com. It will ask you the joining code, and the question will come up. I know also Carol is posting it on the chat. Sorry, I can't see the chat. So Carol,
yes, I have posted it.
It's okay, posted. So I hope you're answering because we have around 3 minutes to respond to that question. And I should be seeing the live responses. Corrected. Okay, they're starting to come. Great. We have 16 responses so far. We still have many more to come through. Okay, we have 18 responses. Have everyone responded? I think we are over 40 when you are starting. Okay, that's a minute gone. Because of time, please continue bringing in the responses. But what comes very quickly is ideas of moral, correct, right and wrong, privacy, moral consideration. Again, it can moral issues to do with the morals are coming quite strongly. Right thing, compliance, integrity, wrong, privacy, right and wrong guidelines, correct thing to do, moral guidelines, confidentiality, fairness, regulation. So there are quite a number of responses, and all these, I'm not going to say any of them is wrong. All these help us to frame what we think of ethics. And hope I'll be able to go back to the presentation. Not very sure how I do that. Okay, so that is quite well. If I go back to, should I just stop sharing and then I continue again? Because I'm not
yes, you can, yeah.
How to
what
go
I
back.
will do is at the end, I will just share what has finally come in because I'm monitoring that on the back end. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not one. Okay. So we've had quite a number of reflections on morals. And like I said, many of the things that you have said are quite right. We are all thinking about it. And sometimes we make a differentiation between what is normally known as ethics approval, the regulatory systems and structures that support ethical conduct of research, and also ethics as a field of knowledge that is aimed at understanding how best to interact with humans, and that's where areas of morality, of what is the right thing to do is, of how you respect each other's, autonomy and so on. So in ethics, we talk about ethics as norms and standards that guide personal and interpersonal conduct, and they deal with what ought to happen in different scenarios. It helps one to decide on actions or behaviors that are wrong or that are right, and that's where the moral reasoning comes from. And these norms and standards could be written or they could be spoken. A lot of our African ethical ways of understanding all norms about what is the right thing to do in any scenario. It's often through, how you're brought up, how your parents bring you up, how the society considers what is right and wrong. You might not find them codified, you might not write them in documents, but they are passed on generational. Now, when it comes to research ethics, then we have to think about what is the right thing to do when you're interacting with people who are involved in research, including clinical trials. And so all the time, there's a balance of what is the right thing to do and how do you make a decision of what is the right thing to do. And this is where we say, when it comes to ethics, there are many ways in which we think about ethics. There are many fields, disciplines that are involved in thinking about ethics. Right from, I talked about culture and traditions, religion and theology, philosophy, art, anthropology, sociology. You can think about it, anything. Most disciplines, almost all disciplines will have aspects of ethics. And all these thinking about ethics feeds into how guidance documents are developed and what we do in practice. So looking at guidance documents, and then talk a little bit about them. There are many documents out there. Where is your starting point? And there are many ways in which we can work with guidelines. One of the ways approach that we often use, and especially when we consider aspects of ethics inquiry, which are very empiric, which is you're investigating what the right thing to do is. There are many ways in which you can think about it. One is You can experience an ethical issue on the ground in the field as you interact with the participants. And then you can ask, how do you know this is an ethical issue? Is when you don't know what the right thing to do is. That is one way. When you feel or you sense that in this scenario, I don't know what to do. Or in this scenario, I feel conflicted. That is one way you can start identifying there's an issue here that I'm not very clear what I should do. And when you experience that, there are several ways you can approach it. One of it is obviously you can consult the literature, look at the guidelines, you can talk to people, you can decide to investigate about it and get views on how best you could address that situation. Another way is to look at what do existing guidelines say about a particular practice, a particular area, and then using that frame some research questions to see, find out what are the ground realities in relation to this area. And then feed up to say how well are the documents articulating what is actually happening in the ground. And when I talk about this, the first one is what we call ground up. You're learning from the ground and look at documents and talking and investigating. Or when you start from documents and then frame your research questions. A lot of times they are not clear cut. A lot of times there's a lot of overlapping and interaction between these two approaches. There are many other approaches, but these are the two that many of us use. And so that's what I'll be drawing on quite a lot. And one of the approach in ethics that we use a lot is what we call principle-based approach. And we say a principle is a well-developed explanatory concept in ethics around which there is wide agreement within the discipline. Remember, I talked about different disciplines. A classic one, three ones that are quite familiar, is the idea of autonomy. Individuals have got agency to decide for themselves what the right thing to do is. And the concept of respecting autonomy of participants, of individuals, is generally accepted across different disciplines, including in health, and of course in research. And within research, the principle of respect for the autonomy of participants is enacted through the informed consent processes, community engagement processes, and so on. Another very well known principle is benefiting. And this we know is maximizing potential benefits and minimizing potential harms for participants in research. And then we have justice, ensuring that there's fair distribution of benefits and burdens of research at population level. It moves further to say that those who are likely to benefit from the research should also be involved in the research. And in so doing, they'll also enjoy the benefits of being in the research, as well as what might eventually come out of that research. And so we talk about distributive justice. There's also issues of social justice, who get selected to participate in research, and whether we are being fair in the participant selection when we consider about selecting participants for research. Now, these are well-documented principles. There are many guidelines that talk about them. There are books that have been written about them. I show there the Belmont report, which is actually the first documented guideline about the ethical principles for health research, emanating from many atrocities that happened a while ago, but also books that have unpacked these principles and articulated how they might be applied in research, including the book by Bicham and the like. In addition to those guidance documents, there are many international, national, institutional ethics guidelines that end research with thinking about either conducting vaccine trials or even doing research generally can draw on. These are just a few of those. What is important across all is they all talk about the three main principles. The fourth one, especially in clinical trial, which we talk about non-maleficence, and this is minimizing harm. It pays attention to the fact that in research, vaccine trials, there's a duty of care that those who are conducting research or clinical trials cover duty of care to make sure they do not inadvertently expose participants to harm. It might not appear in all other research. Some of the research do not involve participants either being involved in therapeutics or in trials. So you have a lot of observational studies that do not have anything to do with products being trialed on people. So non-maleficence may not always be very clear in those kinds of studies. Again, to note that research ethics is dynamic. We are now having new issues that are coming up and guidelines are being revised. We have issues on data sharing, sample sharing, genome-wide studies, biobanks as issues, and now we have artificial intelligence that is coming up. And as new innovation technology come up, there's a reflection on how well the guidelines are, whether they are being active to respond to the emerging issues and are being revised. These are some of the guidelines guidelines that you are quite familiar with, including the guideline for good clinical practice, which has now been revised. We have a new one which was enacted on 19th May 2023, and it is actually quite well condensed. We also have, and it's really important to know that almost all countries now have got their national guidelines that draw heavily on the international guidelines or that draw heavily on each other. And I've just shown some of those, one from Kenya, National Commission of Science and Technology and Innovation Guideline, COSTIM, and the South African Good Clinical Practice, Clinical Trial Guidelines from South Africa, and many other countries have got it. So it's always wherever country we are going to, whichever country is involved in the vaccine trial, get familiar with their clinical, with their guidelines, because it's so important to make sure that you are respecting what country guidelines articulate. In addition to guidelines provide broad statements of what ought to happen. It's one thing to say respect autonomy of participants, but what does that look like and what does that mean in research? So what has happened is then development of what we call toolkits, implementation guidelines, standard operating procedures, and so on. And what I showed there is Handbook for Good Clinical Research Practice by WHO 2005. And within it, you have the 14 principles of GCP. And in each of those, it is articulated how you might actually implement it. Another useful online resource in case you're looking for materials to read about vaccine trials and how to undertake them. There's a Global Health Network, which is an online platform with amazing courses and with amazing materials that you could easily access or that you need to do to register. And again, I talked about ongoing revision of guidelines. I don't know how many of you participated in on the webinar launched by WHO on guidance for best practices for clinical trials. This is a revision. And this was launched 25th September, that's 2 weeks ago. And it is quite well condensed. If you look at, we've moved from a bigger document to a narrower one, and it's quite articulated. And in their overview, they say that these guidelines are intended to replace the WHO guidelines on clinical evaluation of vaccines, regulatory expectations which were adopted by that committee in 2001, and so on. So it's important to keep in touch with the revisions of guidelines, see what is being articulated, and what you need to be taking account of. Again, this is the latest launched last month, 2024 by WHO. And it is a collaboration of many efforts, including Global Clinical Trial Collaborative, which was feeding into some of the articulations of the statement in this guidance document. In Africa, we have AVARE, which is a platform that helps with review of vaccine trials. And this is the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum, set up again by WHO. It is a network of African national regulatory authorities and ethics. They have amazing documents on their website. They articulate their approaches to harmonization and reliance as part of the pillars of capacity building, how to do joint reviews, how to collaborate, and they provide what they call benchmarks or knowing how well you're doing in country, how well you are in setting up your regulatory system. And they also articulate the processes by which protocols should follow if they are seeking for joint review through AVAREF forum. I'm sure and I'm hoping that within this, among the participants, there are people who are more familiar with AVAREF and they can speak more to it. There's a reference there to the link or to the online platform in case you're interested. Like I said, there are very good materials, even of in-country ethics review committee, checking how well they are in terms of setting up their regulatory system. So that is on guidance documents. When it comes to ethical framework, so I've talked about the guidance. So how do they match with ethical frameworks? Now, frameworks, what they do is they pull together different perspectives around an ethical issue. And therefore, they are useful for thinking or reasoning what course of action might provide the most moral outcome, or what do you consider when you're encountering ethical issues and you're reasoning out what the best course of action is. So they help us in reasoning, in weighing up different courses of action and figuring out what choices are or what decisions need to be made and what the competing perspectives are. And when we think about ethical reasoning, there are several different approaches in which we can use. One of it is what we call duty of care, and we call it. I'll not talk about the word, but just what are the competing interests. Often you'll hear, especially clinical researchers, having a conflict when they are focusing on the trial and encounter a participant who also has comorbidities, which are not being covered by that trial. And so your duty of care would require that you treat a participant, not just a participant, but a patient, and provide the medical care that they require. Your responsibility as a trialist might require that you see this as a participant, and that actually by treating them, you might also be interfering with the trial. And that can be tension in what you do then. So some of the approaches that you could call on, and I've listed some of those, the consequences of actions, the right-based approaches that prioritize the interests of the participant, of the patient, care-based, and so on. There often are tensions in weighing this up. And so ethical frameworks help you to tease out, when you're thinking about rights-based approach, what does that mean? When you think about duty-based approach, what does that mean in practice? And so they can help you map out the considerations that you need to take into account. And there are many ethical frameworks, but one that is really used widely in Africa is one that was written many years ago by Ezekiel Emmanuel and the team. And the reason why this is so popular in Africa, because many ethics review committees drew on this to develop their national guidelines for research in their countries. This framework was developed in 2004, was responding to issues that were arising at the time. Of course, it also needs to be reviewed with advancement. What it did is distill from existing documents what they call 8 ethical frameworks for research in developing countries, for international research in developing countries, or for clinical research in developing countries. And for each principle, what they call principles, they then further went to provide what they call benchmarks. How can you know? How you as a researcher would you know that you're meeting these principles? How would you know that you are respecting community, you are respecting participants, you are considering fair benefits and so on? So they provide benchmarks, and those benchmarks have been so powerful for researchers who are trying to figure out what should I do in certain situations. And I noted down there, in addition to this, there's an emphasis on collaborative partnerships and respect for communities as an additional value to existing guidelines. And currently, there's an ongoing collaboration coordinated by Africa CDC to develop an Africa-centric ethical framework for health research, drawing on core values that are said to be really important in Africa. That is an ongoing collaboration with some timelines on when they could come. And it's likely to be more value-based and principle-based. So again, think about different approaches to ethics. So the 8 principles, I'll not go into all of those, but they are well articulated in the document. Feel free to look at the paper. And then, like I said, they are quite familiar to many ethics review committees. They are not specific to any study. They can cover all kinds of studies. The benchmarks really provide very good details, but still it is not clear cut. It's not about a tick box. I've done all this, therefore my work is ethical. There's always some balances that is going to be done between social values, scientific values. If you say all those, there will always be some tension. And so how you make decisions about which ones you prioritize is really important. So come to the next question. So that is on guidelines and frameworks and how they could help us when it comes to studies, health research generally, but also specifically to vaccine trials. I now want to move away a little bit from the documentation guidance to start thinking what happens in practice. It's great to have these documents with us, but what happens in practice? And so this is the second question. What ethical issues arise during conduct of a vaccine trial? Just think about any of the ethical issues, and again, use the Menti app to support your responses.
The link is also on the chat.
Okay, I don't know whether people are able to open. Nobody has yet responded. I am sure there are many ethical issues. Are we able to access the link?
It seems that there's a bit of a hiccup. I don't know whether everybody is able to access it, but I've also posted the link on the chat.
Or use the QR code?
It's still showing the first question.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you be able to just reduce
maybe
the link?
Maybe they just then post on the chat instead of.
Okay, that also works. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Move it back. So, Carol, I'll not be able to see the chat. You could, oh, maybe I could. I'm not very sure how to do it.
So we're having answers coming through the chat. There's from your question, there's the confidentiality, there's consent, there's non-maleficence, there's accent and consent, access and availability. Keep it coming, guys. There's use of placebo that is non-beneficial, e.g. saline injection versus the vaccine that could be beneficial. It's slowly coming in.
So perhaps as you respond, you could be a little bit more descriptive. So when you say issues of safety, that's a little bit, but when you say social value of research, what exactly is the ethical issue with that? Because that's a principle. So what is the ethical issue with it? Let me stop sharing a little. So I can see.
I can quickly just read through. There's the end of trial information, there's consent, moral consideration, safety, there's social value of research, there's a post-trial access, there's safety, Jane has said vulnerability, Bridget has said data privacy.
Okay,
So
thank
quite a
you.
diverse, yeah.
Yes, so quite a diverse range of ethical issues that can arise in the conduct of vaccine trials. And all of those that you're putting there are valid. What I would, however, push a little bit is when putting an issue and it is not very clear whether it is an ethical issue or it is a principle. When I move to ethical issue, it's more descriptive. A classic thing I think I picked up on social value of research. So when you put it like that, it is not clear what the ethical issue is. Maybe Marianne, Marianne Boye, would you explain a little bit what is the ethical issue with social value of research? Are they able to speak?
Let me unmute her, Marianne.
Hello.
Can hear you. Go on, Marianne.
Oh, okay, thank you. So looking at the ethical issues that could arise in something like the social value of the research, I'm thinking maybe how these trials would benefit, the group or communities in where the research is being conducted. So I don't know, for example, you would not conduct research, clinical trials in a certain group, and then it would not come back to benefit them. Like you take it to a whole different population. I'm thinking of it that way.
Okay, so you're kind of thinking about social value in terms of who eventually would benefit from the product that might come out of that research, right?
Yes.
Okay, it's good to take account of that, and also perhaps that might be more relevant. The way you framed it might be more relevant at later phases of clinical trials and earlier phases. Phase 1 trials might not always be with participants who will eventually benefit out of it. Because some of them are about figuring out, will this even work in a human body? That's a different question than the social value aspect of it. So that's just an example. When we articulate the ethical issue, and this could be both, issue is a neutral word. It could be both positive, it could also be negative. Whenever we articulate, we need to move a little bit further than the principle to say, what is the issue in this instance? When we talk about informed consent is a neutral word. What is the issue with informed consent? Then now you articulate either where the problem is or where the good practices are. So you need to articulate that if you are even to consider how will I then therefore either go ahead and investigate the issue. So in the next few slides, I'll take you through some of the practical issues that are often faced in clinical trials, but also in research generally. And we always say that it could be trial, it could be research, are often international. International might mean that you either have participants from different countries, this could be within Africa, South, North, South, whatever, or even people from different backgrounds coming together. And because of this, they have different interests, they have different values, they have different powers, and therefore we need to take account of interaction with the participants and communities hosting the trial, with people who are working within that trial, the staff team, the research workers, who could be working in very different contexts. And therefore, for example, how informed consent is undertaken in one context could be quite different from how it is undertaken in another context. With ethics review committees and regulators, who will also have perhaps similar or quite different systems of approval, and who would pay perhaps similar or different attention to specific things within the clinical trial. And also you need to take attention or pay attention to the trial institution that is hosting the trial, because institutions also might have different systems, might have different requirements for conduct of trials within that institutions and so on. So you have got to negotiate so many multiple layers of relationships and so many different guidelines and so many different processes. And you need to take account of them. Each of those interactions are going to involve people who are quite important in their trial. Now, talking about context, this is an example of some of the contexts in which we might find ourselves working, where we have different socioeconomic levels of participants, where the technology capacities are quite different, where we might be working with constrained health systems. So when participants are coming to participate in a trial, they might have to consider the relationship between those who are in a trial and those who are queuing for the general care in a facility, and whether any preferential treatment is being given, how that may play out either within that facility or in the wider community. So these are just examples of some of the particular contextual issues that you might need to take attention to. You might need to consider that people might be traveling far to come to the trial. So those are some of the things that you need to consider. We often say that in many of the settings in low and middle income countries, we are often working within really constrained resource settings. This is also where we have the high morbidity and mortality rate, where our public health facilities are quite constrained, and there are differences in power and resources. This is where we need to research the most, but also because of exactly these contextual factors, there's potential for what we call exploitation. People might join up in research, not because they really understand what is research or because they really want to participate in research, but that is the only source of healthcare that is available to them. And because of that, they can sign up for things that they never in the first instance really considered carefully. And therefore, it is important to take account of the context and how ethical guidelines might help you when you're in this kind of setting. I would have wanted to have a moment to reflect on this scenario, but we will not because of time. So I will leave it in the presentation slide. It is just a scenario of a practical situation we found ourselves in a few years ago. And when you've done everything that the guidelines tell you to do in terms of seeking consent, engagement, really carefully watching the system, people agreeing that they will turn up for the trial, but then the first day, the first week, the first 2 or 3 weeks, you find in fact, the first day, one mother turns up. Yet you had signed up on nearly 100 mothers to come with their children. And that's a point to sit back and say, what happened here? And sometimes to take note that it might not even be about the trial, but to have antennae to know that there could be other things going on in the community that might have an implication on the trial, which was a big learning for us. I will now, perhaps in the next few minutes, talk about 3 main factors that we need to pay attention to: informed consent, benefits in trials, and frontline workers or research staff. Guidelines are very clear about how you can gain what we call valid, true, authentic consent in research and clinical trials. And often the process is like this. The researcher, you explain what the study is about. They normally say in the language of the participant, use whatever materials that are social category appropriate, the language. You can follow all the cultural norms when it comes to the content. It is then expected that prospective participants will understand what is being proposed. And once they understand, they will make a free choice about whether to join the study or not. This is what the guidelines will talk about. Seems very clear, straightforward, and that they normally say the process needs to be documented. That's why, as the core team, you'll sign up the consent forms to say they have explained, they have asked all the questions, they apparently understood, and they have given their consent. So it seems very straightforward. In practice, not only in our settings in Africa, but globally, there are many challenges in consent processes. Of course, some of these are exacerbated in low-income settings. Normally, there would be differences in cultural practices about decision-making. Should an individual, the assumption often in clinical trials is the individual will make that decision. But often we find that we are living in communities where decisions are made collectively. And the voices of significant others have got a huge implication on the decisions that are made. And this may not even depend on the education level. Gender does play a role. Our studies have shown that gender does play a role, but it is never that clear-cut. There are also greater inequities between the resources, power, and access to information among the various stakeholders that will be interacting with. As a researcher, you might be seen as a source of power, as an authority on a field. It's even more complex if you're a clinician who is also seeking consent, because people might confuse your clinical responsibilities with the research responsibilities and might feel unable to properly say, give their decisions, especially if those decisions were not within the study. There are, of course, many differences within countries, communities, and settings, and that's why I talked about the importance of taking account of context. We all know what participants should know, what information must be in the consent form. I will not go into all this. I think I want you to focus a little bit on the gray box. How much information do you give to a participant in order for them to understand what you are asking of them? Clinical trials are notorious for having pages and pages of information. A lot of it legally, with very legalistic languages. And so when we are thinking about seeking consent, we always have to ask, what is the importance of this process? Is it to meet the funders' requirements? Is it to meet the legal requirements that somebody signs a form that they actually understood? I'm not very clear whether they understood. Or is there a genuine interest to articulate consent in a way that participants do understand what it is that you are asking of them and what it is that they are signing up for? And even with the best practices, some of the information is really hard, but it's really key for clinical trials. So that is an aspect we have to think about. How you are seeking consent, culturally appropriate, how much information is in that? How is the layout of the consent form? Is it easier for participants to follow through? Do you have cues that help you figure out whether they are getting? How often do you seek? Who else is involved when you are seeking consent? So that's an aspect of the process. There's also an aspect of who is giving the information. And this we found in our context really matters a lot. I've already talked about core differentials between potential participants and researchers, clinical trialists. And also, even within the same context, you have to consider, is it a young person who's approaching older people? How are they doing this? Gender, and what the norms say, views of the research being proposed. Are the field workers or even the frontline workers feeling that their performance is based on how many people they are recruiting and therefore are likely to encourage and even coerce participation in research rather than carefully considering what participants want? Where is the consent being sought? How is that venue showing power differential? If you're bringing participants to your office to seek consent from them, how does that play out versus if you were to go to their homestead to seek consent from them? At the home, they are freer, they have more power, you are an invited guest. It is a different scenario. And then the process itself. Is it a once-off? Are there multiple iterations? Do you read through? Or is it an explanation of the information? Are there bullet points to help you? Is it several hours over a day? Is it several days? How are you designing the process of taking consent to be in line with what can strengthen participants' understanding? Throughout, there's a challenge of needing to explain and answer questions, that is the technical bit, and understanding the social, cultural, and economic context in which you are speaking this consent. And those are obvious challenges that we need to think about. And there are also potential when information about a study, a trial is given in the words when participants are sick, and guidelines and often standard operating procedures will articulate what then needs to happen. You need to recognize the diminished ability to give consent when somebody is already sick because they are already in a very vulnerable position in terms of decision making. They may not feel as freer to refuse a trial or as freer to express different opinions or even to ask a question. I talked about some of the difficult words or some terminologies that might be in consent form and how these need to be considered, including what other ways you can discuss. See, some of them are there, the need for signature. What do people culturally understand signing a document means? The issue of confidentiality versus secrecy, what are people signing up for? And then the other one, which we normally talk about, is understanding. Do people understand what they are signing up for? And we often talk about therapeutic misconceptions. This is where people think that they signed up for research, for treatment, there and there, for therapy, and then they didn't realize at the point that they were signing up for research. But that is not clear cut, as is shown by this quote. You know, within research, a child can be involved in research when he is sick. At that point, you'll be thinking that is research. This person understands that is research. Perhaps then you'll be asked to be involved in research. Now, there as a parent, you accept immediately because you want the treatment for your child to get well. Maybe the research involves treatment, so not a problem. So there's no way you'll feel bad about research. And then this person later, just looking at that, you think they understood that it's research they were participating. But then when you look at how this lady later said, she said later, yes, she gets treatment. So there, when the parent is asked for permission to be involved, she will immediately accept. Immediately here you realize, actually, this is not about research, this is about treatment. Now somebody can ask, does it matter? Is it important that they understand this is research and this is treatment? Even though in clinical trials, quite a number of times, there could be treatment that is going on alongside the trial. Does it matter that they are not able to take up? To some extent, it matters because then what is the consent about? When they do not turn up for subsequent appointments because now they are well, then you have to face the fact that maybe they never understood they were research in the first place. When you can follow them up to get blood from them, you then realize actually it's because they never understood this was research. And we have known that can cause many other issues. But supposing they understood this was research anyway, but their main motivation to join was not the research, but the treatment and the care they are getting, is that a problem? That is not a question that I can answer, but that is a point I need you to think about. Okay. So whenever we get in people reflecting on why they would want to join research, there are often many reasons. I think I will skip this and I'll go to the last bullet, where there are many things that can play up into people's decision on whether to join. Some of it is because they have hope and expectations about what is going to happen within their research, including their own treatment. It's important that they understand the key elements of research if they are to make an informed decision. And the point here to emphasize is informed decision. In context of poverty and other inequities, these can influence the voluntariness and the decision making. Again, I've talked about heightened expectations and concerns. There could be trust or mistrust, and how this plays out in relationships is really important. Are they able to question clinical staff? Are they only interested in accessing study-related care? In other words, they do not hear the risks that are being discussed in informed consent. So should this risk actually happen, then you're having all these other things that can come up, including how people understand it and how information about the study is discussed in the community. They can also exaggerate concerns. We found that anything to do with blood is particularly sensitive in our community. And so we must really pay attention to how we talk about blood and volumes and the regularity and why it is being taken. And we have also found from our study that if we provide too many benefits to participants, they often question, why are you giving us so much? What is going on here? They think there's something hidden behind providing too many benefits. But that does not mean that we provide too few either. Okay, so that is on consent, and there are many areas that to unpack. I want to very quickly, and I think I'm going to be very quick here on fair benefits and consider some of the considerations on fair benefits. I think we are quite familiar with this quote that offer participants too little while they are exploited. Offer them too much and their participation might be unduly used. When you're providing that, that is a real challenge. How do you know what is the right amount of and the forms of benefits to provide in clinical trials? Because either way, you might end up being either you're exploiting them or you're unduly using them. And there are no right answers. Just to recognize that normally we talk about trial benefits in three broad categories. There are those that are directly related to the participants because of their participation. These are what we call therapeutic benefits that could be from the intervention that is being trialed. There are also indirect or collateral benefits that are as a result of being in research. And these sometimes are called ancillary care. They are not directly related to the trial, but by being a member or participating in this research, then there are additional benefits that can come, like free healthcare check, screening. That is not related to the trial, but that could be part of the benefit that is being offered to participants and perhaps their families. And then there are what we call aspirational benefits. These are from the results of the research and often talks about post-trial assets and the post-trial obligation. And there are many. Okay, I'm being told about time. Okay. Thank you. So there are many challenges when it comes to thinking about benefits in a clinical trial. And especially if the trial is within first health system. Normally, auxiliary care is any other care that could be provided that is not directly related to the trial. And I've given an example of that. By providing auxiliary care to participants, it might come across in the community as though they are being favored, or as though they are a special group, and it's documented how this could sometimes cause tension. But on the other hand, being responsive to the context means that we are not blind to what we can provide in the community or to the trial participants. If somebody appears and they do require referrals, often the standard practice would be to refer them to either up the system or to clinical care or to social services, depending on what the issue is. When the trial itself is happening within a hospital or clinical unit, it will require that same relationship that is going on between the healthcare system, managers, providers, and the trial. And this can facilitate easier referring system. However, if the the trial or the research is not happening within the context of providing that care, then often you might find as a research team, you are limited on the extent to which you can take on auxiliary care or more responsibilities beyond those that you can do within a trial. And this can cause moral dilemmas for staff who are involved in the research. This is something that PI investigators must clearly consider, articulate in where they are setting up their trial. So when we are thinking about benefits, and it is before, during, after the trial, there are those that you have a primary responsibility as a researcher, as a trialist, to provide benefits. And I talk about benefits in the broadest sense, to include compensation, payment, and any other therapeutic benefits that can come. The ones that you'd have the greatest duty are those participants who are in the trial, and this is a requirement in study design to provide essential care, to provide compensations for any expenses, to provide reimbursement for expenses, and in addition, perhaps to consider additional other care that could be provided, so long as it does not lead, it's not so much excessive that it unduly influences them. And then as you move up the circle, you realize that your responsibility, level of responsibility is not as great. For example, healthcare and support to other family members or other people who might accompany your participants might not be as great as to your participants, and also responsibility to wider community and families might not be as great as to your participants. In all the time when you're providing benefits, you need to consider what influence it might have on autonomy, on beneficence, on social justice, how it might affect collaborative partnerships with communities within themselves, with research institutions, and the issue of transparency, what you're providing. And some of the areas that you might need to balance. What I'll not have time to go this, but inside the circle, you can see some of the examples of the benefits that you could provide. Some of the intended consequences you might need to consider for participants, for families, for healthcare, social services. For example, are you taking up provision of a service that would ideally have been provided by the public healthcare system as a way of boosting up community-wide benefits, which is great. But you also have to consider, once the trial is over, will you have replaced a really important healthcare service that is now no longer available because you are providing? So those are some of the things you might have to consider very carefully when it comes to providing benefits. It does not mean that you don't provide, it means that you really have to have some well-considered conversations. So you need to consider extent to which participants would benefit from the care, the auxiliary care, whether participants will depend on the researchers for care, or it is a way that this can be part of health system care and to build that up. You might also have to think about the depth and intensity and duration of the research participant relationship. A once-off interaction might not require you to take on as much responsibilities for care, auxiliary care, as would if you were in a community for 2 years, for 3 years, for 5 years, for 10 years, and so on. And then we talk about the uncompensated risk of burdens as a debt of gratitude. All along, you have to consider what impact this will have on time, on cost, on the raising expectation. And now I'll do the last bit, which is an attention to frontline workers, or those who are often interacting with the participants. They play a really important role in the conduct of that research because they're interacting with multiple participants, with multiple stakeholders. They experience complex layered sources of vulnerability and often have very constrained agency. They may not be able to make decisions on what the right thing is, because that decision most often rests on the PI or on their seniors. And we've been documenting the numerous ethical dilemmas frontline staff face and especially in our context, and that often they are under-supported in dealing with these dilemmas. There's a lot of documentation on this. Please do feel free. One of the things that we've been doing is what we call ethics reflection discussions, which is a peer-to-peer mentorship facilitated, moderated by an ethics expert or somebody with understanding of ethics to help them tease out those morally difficult dilemmas that they might be facing in the field. You can read up on it. I'll not talk about it. What is important is they come with such rich information about what is happening in the field, and it will be such a great resource to really work with your frontline staff to understand what is happening and how to undertake the research most ethically. I will not talk about the rest. I'll leave the slides because of time. I just wanted to flag again the importance of proper engagement, community engagement, and different consultations that you could do because they could inform you on what is happening on the ground and some documentation that we've done around this area. And that is a link to a very nice site where you can read many materials. It is MESH. MESH is hosted within the Global Health Network Hub, and it talks about engagement with community, including current understanding around how to navigate complexity of engagement in health research. There are some broader ethical issues which are not discussed, and one of it is to recognize that trials often we have to think about principles of collaboration, and they provide some of those there. We have to be very sensitive to the fact that we have generally very low investment from African governments in health research. These are really broader ethical issues of distributive justice, vaccine equity, prioritization, nationalism that kick in. And again, yeah, you can read up on some of this stuff. There's a very nice commentary that came out last year that was mapping out the current status then in January of vaccine development and where they have been developed, and really gives you an idea of what is happening. And this is an ethical issue. We are not developing a vaccine. We are depending on others. Then there's something that needs to be done, and I'm sure that is why we have this course going on. In conclusion, there are numerous guidelines for vaccine trials. These often draw on international guidelines. We must be aware of the local, national, in-country guidelines for ethical conduct of vaccine trials. Having an awareness of that is not enough. Ethical principles and guidelines mean that one must take account of the context in which these trials are conducted. Frameworks can help us in understanding some of the ethical concepts and how those could be applied in different settings, but ground realities could be far complex, and therefore we must pay attention to ground realities, including the frontline workers' engagement and engaging with different stakeholders, and the importance of documentation. Importantly, science and ethics do not conflict, and ethical research is a scientific requirement. Even if you have the most well-developed vaccine trial and it is not meeting any of the ethical principles, I am sorry, it is unscientific as it is unethical. Similarly, you can have the best ethically sound research, but it is not meeting the scientific requirements of scientific validity, whatever, it is still unethical. And those are my last comments. Thank you so much.
Wow, Prof, I'm speechless. I could keep wanting more and more just because of the nature of the work that science and research gets involved in, and the fact that you're dealing not only just with human beings, but all the different aspects of research. So maybe I can see questions coming in. We have actually 30 minutes, which are a good time for us to be able to now ask you questions, get clarifications, and maybe I can start off with just asking, with the kind of expertise that you have, did you walk in as a high school student, as an undergraduate student? I know that this is what you're going to do in your career. And if not, how did you make that choice? So because then we have a quite diverse group here. Somebody could be wanting to take over your job what would they have to do for them to end up having to handle this particular aspect of science and research?
That's a good question. Take me back to many years ago. No, I didn't start in health research. Health research came later in my life. Like many people, I was just going by the career that I thought at the time made sense. I wanted to make money. So um, my first uh, uh, degree was in agricultural economics. I wanted to be a manager, managing farms, not really. Then I didn't like farming too much, so that didn't work very well. But what then happened is in my first posting, I got to work with an international um, organization that was doing what we call community development. And I really wanted, it was very transformative in my career. In fact, I learned about um, how when you involve people in decision making about their lives, it is so transformative. So that's how I got into engagement. My first entry to research is to help out figure out how KEMRI-Wellcome could set up an engagement platform. Then it was a small group where the focus was on content and was coming in with ideas of you cannot just deal with the participants, you have to think about communities because I've done a this exposure with an bilateral organization that showed me the way and started with me with that. And from engaging communities, what became very clear to me is the negotiating roles of frontline workers and the fact that they are hardly acknowledged. You'll not find ownership that mentions their name. They do so much work. They are actually always negotiating the data that is being collected. And I was really keen on what best can be done to support that. So that is how I then started gravitating towards ethics, towards wanting to see what can be done with frontline workers. And then I went on, did my PhD in, it was many years ago. But yeah, it was on ethics, but largely based on frontline workers. And really, I was very embedded. I became a field worker. I was going out to the field. I became one of the, I was completely embedded in the studies and I totally enjoyed it. And then from there, just then it grew into ethics and it became part of my life and social, and now to where I am. That's a abridged version
Yeah.
of how I came to be where I am.
The one underlying factor is a passion that drove you into this particular area. So that's good to know. We have a question from Dr. Emily. Would conducting several vaccine trials within a specific region be considered an ethical issue?
Would conducting vaccine trials, I should say that.
If you're conducting several vaccine trials within a specific
Okay.
region over and over
Mhm.
again, is that considered to be an ethical issue?
I don't think so. I think it depends on what the vaccine trials are about, why you are conducting them in that region. I mean, if you look at anywhere all over the world, you'll always have a trial, a type that is established somewhere, and where they'll be conducting several trials. So long as that is addressing priority issues, I don't think that is a problem.
Okay, just a follow-up to that, what would be the case where traditionally you'll find certain regions in the country have, there's a malaria vaccine trial, there's a typhoid vaccine trial, but it's the same population of people to the point where now one trial is collecting blood, another one is collecting stool sample, but it's the same population. What would you say about something like that?
So again, it goes back to the question of social value. Where is this problem? If that is the population that is experiencing the problem, then you're bound to find out what is happening. Now, I think in our work, what we then try to do, it could be the same population, but are they the same people participating in 2, 10, 20 trials? That is where the problem starts to be. How as an institution that is set up, again, setting up a trial is not something that you can just lift up and go off and set it up somewhere. There has to be an ecosystem that supports the trial. That in itself is an investment. It's not the kind of investment that you can do 1, 2, 3, then tomorrow you uplift, you go to another it is an investment that is quite heavy. So that is one thing you need to do. There are practical issues to it. But also in addition to that, how are we approaching communities from that population who have been invited to different trials that are happening at the same time? Do you have a mechanism of making sure that somebody is not participating in 10, in 20 trials at the same time? That could be different. How are you making sure that perhaps there are no interactions that could happen with the interventions that have been given? And that is an institutional approach. So, for example, in KWTRP, somebody is marked up. There's a database, HGSS, clinical data is marked up. So anytime you are being approached, somebody can go to the system and check, are you participating in trials? Which trials did you participate to? Would you be a viable, participant, potential participant for this, yes or no? Already you are able to screen from the database. But that might not also be open for many other institutions, especially if they don't have that kind of database.
True. There's a question from Joel Owaret. How do we strike a balance to allow participants to make informed decisions, either to participate or not to participate based on information given, and not be influenced by the benefits? In resource limiting areas, it appears that participants are influenced by the benefits they get if they participate. Sounds like a trick question.
So that is one which I've got multiple layers in it. And one of the approach, I'll just very quickly go to the approach that we have used, is how we even the ground from where you're recruiting from. And one way to even the ground is to offer the benefits to as many as possible. A classic is boosting the health facility where everybody is accessing healthcare. So they don't feel like the only way they can access healthcare is through participation in research. And this could be perhaps adding an additional doctor, could be perhaps considering drugs stock out. And again, this has got to be articulated to funders when you're seeking funding, because you will be aware of the context. And more importantly, what's within the healthcare system. So that it's not, sometimes it is not you going out to provide the care, but it is working with the healthcare system so that the doctors are the ones providing the care. And therefore, people don't feel like they have to join up to the service. Those are just some of the approaches, but the consent process is really important. There's a lot of, in our institution, we're lucky we have an engagement team that helps the researchers figure out what information needs to be going out and to which groups, and how do you then approach participants in a way that it considers how the information is coming and how free they are to make their decision.
Great, thank you. Fred Omiti is asking, what are your thoughts on standardization of washout period for vaccine trials in a community?
Oh, I think this might be something that is more appropriate to a trialist than me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fred. I will go and read out on things. I'm sure there must be something that talks about how often should we be, doing trials in the same community, the same people, and I think this is where it comes out. That's not really my area of expertise, but thank you for pointing that out.
What I will do is that once we share this presentation on the social media pages and they can reach out on the email, then I can be able to link them up for more information on that. And we have a question from John Gitonga. My question is on whether, from an ethical perspective, do you think historically the disadvantaged groups, including low-income populations, have been disproportionately targeted for most clinical trials?
Great question. I think if we look at the history of vaccine trials, I would say no. And in fact, I think you need to look at the paper that was referencing about the status of vaccine development pipeline. Many of the trials, in fact, many of the trials are not even in the list. There's so much need for research here, or in low-income countries, or even these developed countries, because there's so much that we don't understand. Why vaccines don't work the way they're supposed to work, because they were never trialed in this population in the first instance. So I think, no, they have not been disproportionately being targeted for vaccine trials. That is
Okay.
my take. We need to deal with that. But I'm sure, I know there are some papers that have mapped out how many vaccine trials have happened in each population. And if you pull in that, you'll find we are very far behind when it comes to trials.
Okay, that's interesting to know. We always feel that all the trials come in here, and we're used as a test population. Okay.
And in
So,
fact, if I were to add on that, often the trials that come here are in phase 2, phase 3, far above the early trials, even for things like malaria that are not in some of the countries, are being done in countries where those conditions are not there.
yeah. Okay. There's a comment here from Dr. Emily. Can we have a part 2 of this? There's quite a lot to go through. Maybe you can ask the audience, in light of that, if you could just, because this is a series of webinars that we're carrying out, if you could just let us know what topics within the vaccine research and development space you would want us to address in the next coming series, then you can just quickly put that in the chat, because then that will guide us to picking topics that are more in line with what your interests are. But yes, I do agree. Prof, I think you should be able to give us a part 2 of ethics, because it's very interesting. It's also something that we deal with on a day-to-day basis whenever you're doing any kind of research work within the space that we find ourselves. So I will leave that to you to let me know what part 2 will look like, and we can always put that out for the next upcoming webinars.
Okay. We can have our conversations about that.
Yes. Do we have any last-minute questions, comments, queries? We're coming to the top of almost at the tail end of the presentation. Final opportunity to give a question to the professor. Okay. So from me to you, it's just to say a very big thank you for engaging for this long. This has been an hour and a half of very active interaction, very informed kind of engagement. I have learned quite a bit on ethics in regards to research and development and vaccinology. And for the audience that has been with us from the start to the finish, we say thank you very much, Asante Sana, and we look forward to you coming on board for the 7th part of the series that we're carrying out in this year, and looking forward to seeing you. So from me and Professor Dorcas, it's a very big thank you, and have a good evening and be blessed. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.